there is no alternative but to listen and then execute. Folks listen to that. People like to know, after all is said and done, what's the material impact to the company? People are going to zone out. And how do you build a proposal or a pitch with that in mind? When you've had a really good conversation with someone, you can feel it. You know it's a good conversation. It's like how you felt. Not even what the person said, it's how you felt afterwards.
Do you think that the current leader has to be one that listens more than anything else in order to be able to retain top talent, in order to be able to build a business of high performing individuals? Or do you think that that is not necessarily important?
I think it's a balance of three things, right? It sounds very simple, but I think it's one of the most powerful things I've seen.
Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story. Shameless. Wonderful family. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Dzika, my Gangaidzo, and I am your host. Now, the question that I have for you is, have you ever lost a sale or lost a relationship, lost a friendship, lost an argument because you talk too much? Yeah, I said it. You talk a hell of a lot much. Well, stick around if that's something that's of interest to you, because we've got Ludzi here who's going to tell us about his listen to win formula. You might be wondering, who is Ludzi? What is listen to win? Why is that important? Well, deep connections versus big profits. The reason why this is important is because if you listen to HubSpot, they say that 74% of buyers say they are willing to pay more to work with somebody who really listens. I know, that's exactly what I was thinking. This world has got no balance. People are going to list, they're going to pay more just because somebody gonna listen to it. My pocket is not that strong. Lutzi, how are you doing today?
Hello, hey DK, how are you? So good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. So in this world of AI where things are writing emails on your behalf, or you pick up the phone and you're talking to somebody, a teleprompter, press 9 and blah, blah. How does that make you feel? Like during that process, how does that make you feel?
Nobody wants to be on the phone listening to that. I think you have so many examples of, press 9 for this is Vodacom support line, and then you're just sitting there and you're like, clearly this thing or this person's not listening to me. You're gonna disengage. You don't want to be in that situation. And personally, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Nobody likes that, right?
No, and the funny thing is, I always just want to press 900. I'm like, get me to a real human.
Get to a person. I want to be listening to you. Accelerate that, right?
Even if the robot can help me, even if it's just I wanna hear my bank balance. No, I'm gonna go to a person to tell me. But exactly. That's the kind of world that we are living in. We're seeing a lot more of that, chatbots coming in. Mm-hmm. What do you think that does for the ability for connection and for something that feels more authentic?
Yeah, I think, I've been in the space of helping customers implement software for a while. And I think people right now are looking at, give an example, AI, right? The chatbot, or even just like the virtual agent that will answer the call, and literally just the ability to connect with something or someone that sounds or even pretends that they're listening is huge, right? There's a reason why the cost to serve someone on the phone is so much higher, because it does take a lot more, right? You need to hire people, but folks are using agents to kind of use the voice capability to do that. And I think what's going to end up happening is folks are going to stop hiding that 1-800 number or that support number, and then put it right at the top, because now you can have an agent or someone who's willing to listen to you instead of deflect. So yeah, I think that's going to happen. But it's always just the point that you brought up in the beginning. People want to be heard. People want to be listening. People want to be able to just naturally interrupt and oh, if something came to my mind, I actually need this, and pivot in the moment, right? So yeah, I think that's what's going to end up happening.
And then there's this other piece which I found really interesting. This whole idea of quiet hiring, remote work, and
Mhm.
short attention spans that we end up seeing. Where do you think that the current leader has to be one that listens more than anything else in order to be able to retain top talent, in order to be able to build a business of high performing individuals? Or do you think that that is not necessarily important?
That's a great point. I think for us, right, at Trail Consult, we have built out, a team of, 10 specific specialists, and we have a large, contractor base. But the point that you mentioned about listening comes in different forms, right? Like we have, ask us anything every all hands call, right? And we use that as an opportunity for folks to
Whoa,
share
hold
what
on.
the
I'm going to stop you right there. You know why I'm going to stop you? Because I just
yeah.
realized I did not introduce you. And what you're going to say right now is going to be so much more interesting if it follows right behind. Because you said trail
It's gonna,
consultant, and I'm sure people are going to be like, wait, what do you mean, trail? What's trail consultant? So,
who is that? What is that?
who is that exactly? So, what I'm going to do is meet Ludzi Bokete. Ludzi Bokete is a partner and principal architect at Trail Consult. He is incredibly ambitious. He's got a span of experience in different markets, different industries, spanning within both Botswana as well as within Canada. I'm going to do you a favor and not like butcher your whole, what you've done. Now I'm going to ask you to add a little bit more detail to that. And then to the back end of that, I'd really like to understand exactly what you're talking about with your team of 10, how you then break that up, the different forms of listening. Please go for it.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Deacon. And I think it's the best segue because we've been talking about listening for a long time. I think I always make this joke. My mom tells me that I talk too much, right? So, just for context, my name is Lutzi, and I'm a principal architect, as DK mentioned. Spent a lot of time at Deloitte and Salesforce, also some partners that implement software in New York. And we started and worked on this company called Trail Consult, and it's a cloud service provider. So we do implementation of Salesforce, we do implementation of Microsoft. Those think Copilot, think CRM, think service, and also think cloud engineering. AWS, Microsoft, Azure, those types of capabilities. And I joined this team. We built out this team, and one thing that I found really interesting with the listening component is going from an individual contributor where listening is really around getting your customers, understanding what they need, building out a solution that meets their business outcomes, to then also needing to listen to a broader team that you're growing. And if you're trying to retain and grow the best talent, I think that is a skill. I was at a company called Plative, phenomenal culture, great, leadership, and I've always felt listened to, right? And that's a great feeling. You want to feel listened to. So we try to replicate parts of that in our culture. So every month we have our all hands call, and we allow the folks to ask, whatever they want to ask. And I think the listening isn't just like active listening. It's not just like, yeah, 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 okay, we hear you. I empathize, I hear that. Okay, cool. And then nothing happens.
Next.
It's,
Yeah.
taking account, like listen, like hear it out. We had a call last week, and one of our team members was asking, I'd love to understand how to handle difficult conversations with clients. And literally this morning, we were going through an enablement with the team on how to handle conversations with difficult clients. So it's kind of putting your money where your mouth is. When someone is actually asking and bringing something up, you actually execute on it, right? So actions do speak louder than words, and when you listen, it's kind of a feedback loop. Like that you've been listened to when you've actually executed on, what you've heard,
And
right?
and
Mhm.
I think that's amazing because that idea of putting your money where your mouth is, and I think a lot of the time people have discussions,
Yeah,
people say a lot of things, and the only closure to the idea that you've been listened to is exactly that. Like you see your thoughts, you see your words coming to light in one way or the other, and that
yes,
then validates your ability. But then on the flip side, if you don't see it, then why are you even talking? Like evidently,
Yeah,
your opinions, your points actually mean nothing, and then
yeah.
you end up
It's
not contributing to that space.
That's 100% true. And I think, the context in which you're working or listening is really different, right? So in a context of, leading a team, working with a team and, working with clients, I think there is no alternative but to listen and then execute. But, I'm sure, DK, we've had a long friendship and relationship for a long time. And sometimes, you just need somebody to just hear you and like literally
Yeah.
just empathize, and you don't need them to answer. I don't need you to give me anything. I just need you to hear out this crazy story scenario that I'm going through. So I think that like situational context is also super important to recognize. When is listening, you know, a tool to really get someone to feel heard, and that's what they might need, and then when is listening really an opportunity to build even deeper trust by executing on what's being shared, especially in a client scenario, which can obviously get quite tricky.
So, I love that because you talk about, and I'm going to use the context of what you do from what I've understood, is you've got a technical team, you have very technical conversations, they
Mhm.
have got their individual contributors, and they are human, so they'll have like human problems, like, oh, my keyboard's not working, or I don't know what those technical guys are used to, but there'll be dissatisfaction against certain things, and difficult conversations like you talked about. Then
Mhm.
you have got the ability to sell, right? The ability to sell means that you're going with a customer and you are trying to share your dream, your vision, your idea into their head and then get them to buy. Then there's the one where you have got the contract and now you just, for lack of a better way of saying it, you have to humble yourself
Yeah.
because you're now inside, and all those promises that you made require you to then be able to be almost therapeutic, but also to balance out how you come across. Now, the reason why I broke it up like that is because
Mhm.
the portion of what you said about when you've got a client
Yeah.
and you have to then listen to them, and
Mm.
sometimes you don't have to talk. What I understood you say is that you're going to have to break through and understand the different components of what they're saying, and then you have to
Yeah.
decide what you're going to respond to.
Mhm. Mhm.
How do you
Yeah.
manage that? And in the world like that, because sometimes I'm sure your emotions get a better of you.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? Because that is a very tricky space where you're fighting an internal battle
Yeah.
versus the outcome you're trying to get.
Yeah, no, DK, I love the way you broke it out in that way, because that really articulates our like value chain when we're working with a customer, right? We have to find a customer, you get introduced to a customer, and in the early parts of finding a customer, it's like even with the relationship or with a new friendship,
Yeah.
you want to, seek to understand, right? Before being understood, right? I think that's no as famous words, right, from Stephen Covey, right? But I think
Yeah.
early on in the client relationship that I've found is you're really spending 30% of the time talking and 70% of the time you're listening, right? Because you want to understand truly what the pain is that this customer is going through. And pain is, level one, level two, level three. I could give you an example. I work with a lot of CEOs, CTOs, CFOs, and their main pain might be trying to drive revenue or trying to reduce cost to sell or cost to serve. And that's just the first pain. You go underneath that, and there's pain that exists because of an entire team that's struggling. And then you go even further, and this is all just listening, and you realize that there's this level three pain, which is the internal ambition, motivation that this executive has to either see this project successful. And you can only ever get there if you're listening and you're asking for the person to tell you more about that. And I've found like that internal battle is definitely hard, because there are multiple times when you might see this problem every day. Like I've worked with three or four or five clients that have had the exact same problem, and I know exactly how to solve it. And you want to just kind of go immediately to the solution and just like dive right in, right? It's like you're biting your tongue before you can share it, right? But I think what's really interesting is when you start to listen. it actually sets you up really well for that proposal or for that next conversation that you might have. You might have multiple conversations with a client, but when it switches, it's when you're now sharing your point of view, your perspective, your proposal on how you're going to address this. And I've found, one slide or one, perspective that I always see it, when I was at Salesforce, when I was at Deloitte, there's a framework that we use. It's like what we heard, right? There's literally a slide of just like quotes from the customer, like what we
Yeah.
heard you say in terms of the pain, in terms of the value that this project's going to deliver for you, and being able to tie it back and translate the what we heard to actionable outcomes, where the business value is going to come from. I've found has made the difference between a presentation that lands flat and a presentation that feels like it was co-created. So, you do need to listen in those scenarios. But, when you go further into the process, right, I think when you're working with developers and you're working on a project, sometimes it's, do or die. It's like you need to actually get this work done. And there is listening, but it's more validation that you're doing, right? So uh, when I work with our team and our developers, we ask, the team to listen and get the right requirements, but also we need to get a job done in a certain time. And, you know, there are times when you kind of have to just do the work and not necessarily there's not a lot of collaboration. There's collaboration, but it's more, a means to an end. We're trying to get this work done in this timeline, which is again very situational depending on where you are in that value chain. And the listening techniques are a lot different each time, right?
So,
Yeah.
then that's a very interesting thing, because what I've understood you say there is, at some point after the proposal's done, after you've understood and you've done essentially what we heard you say,
Hmm.
is now it's time to deliver upon what you've heard, what actions that came with that. But then as you're working, it's less talk and more action.
Yeah.
So you're not deliberating anymore. But how then do you close the loop to ensure that what you heard and what solutions you put forward are actually practical, are actually getting you to where you want to be? Because you're
Hmm.
stuck in a balance between delivery versus conversing and
Yeah.
continuing this listening journey. I mean, at some point we just stop listening and just work.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no more.
Yeah.
There's no more Mr. Nice Guy here. I'm not here trying to
Yeah.
listen to everything that you got to say, right? But
100%.
how do you catch yourself in ensuring that you still keep the tentacles open to hear, but
Yeah.
that doesn't become the priority of what the whole phase of the project looks like?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's an ongoing challenge, it's an ongoing balance, right? We have evolved from, I'm sure you've seen, waterfall, different methodologies. So just for context, waterfall is a method that people use to deliver projects. It's a lot of upfront listening, a lot of upfront requirements, and then you just build what's supposed to be built. You go into a little closet and then you come back a couple months later, voila. And that is, useful in certain contexts, but we actually try to take a lot more of an iterative approach, right? So yes, we are going to do a lot of upfront requirements gathering, but when we deliver the project, it's a bit more iterative. So yes, we will do clarification. Yes, we will do more discovery. Yes, we'll do more validation. And that happens. It's just we're getting a bit more feedback because we're building and showing and getting feedback and then having that conversation with a bit of a working product. So in that, you're able to put forward your point of view. You're able to put forward what it's going to look like and get that feedback from the client, get that feedback. And a lot of the times, a customer might not even recognize, right, that this is what it would be. You have these misconceptions of, like, okay, I'm just being specific with this product, right? Like,
Yeah, go
this
for it.
is what this product's going to look like specifically. I want my leads to go here, my opportunities to go here. And it's all kind of theoretical. It's only when you show them and you build out what we've talked about, then they actually start to see, I see, that's what it means. And you kind of need that iterative approach for a customer to kind of feel heard and also for you to make progress. So it's definitely a balancing act the whole way through, which can be a little tricky for sure.
And You know what? So I'm going to draw on some of an experience that I've had. Relatively early on, we we saw the business need. The
Mm,
business need was for some form of an application that would be able to capture information in a controlled, validated way. So we
mhm.
created some forms, and the forms worked exactly like how we thought it would work. And it was a group of us, just two people, bang, 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 done.
Yeah,
Then we deployed it to the business, and the business rejected it. They
yeah,
were like, "Nah, we
yeah,
don't need this." And I was
yeah,
like, "No, we need it." But and and the thing was, what we had to then do was sort of go back
yeah.
and pretend like we didn't know the answer,
Mhm.
and then go through a process, right? And so,
Mm.
have you had an example or an experience whereby you didn't listen, or you thought you knew, or maybe you did know,
Yeah,
and then and then that change management piece fell on its face?
100%. I think the most painful thing is, I'm a big fan of music, and there's a great quote from a famous poet. His name is J. Cole, and it goes along the lines of, good thing we went a long way, bad thing we went the wrong way. And I think that
Yeah,
really summarizes, who are you listening to, right? Like, who is it that you're listening to? Is it the right stakeholders, right? Because we could be listening to, a couple of folks that might never actually be touching that system. Like, to that example, right? How do you bring in the right folks, right? So it's very much situational. Do I have the right folks that are going to be part of this project, or there's going to be the right folks that are going to help like resolve the situation? And if I can kind of take a step back as well and kind of take it out of technology just for a second, in any scenario, right? Like, even if you're trying to resolve a personal matter, if you're trying to resolve a board matter, right? Or, you're trying to just resolve a family matter, right? You need to be listening to the right folks, right? It's like, you might have a one-to-one relationship with someone, and that's great, you can solve it, but it can be also more complex than that. You might need to be listening to different sides of a story, and that's no different in a project, right? It's
yeah,
making sure you have the right people involved for you to get to the right outcome.
yeah,
And
yeah,
a lot of the times it's just making sure that you're kind of doing that homework in the background to kind of figure out, like, keeping the end in mind, where are we trying to go, and who do we need to be involved in that process to make sure we get to that. So, I mean, I've seen it in my personal life, right? You get advice from people, and also in the project context, I think it's even more critical to make sure that you have the right folks. And I've had multiple, like, scenarios, my time at Deloitte and my time at Salesforce, and I've seen projects, not go the right way because we might have not been listening to the right people, right? And that's a very, very common scenario that people do face. Yeah.
and so some of the challenges or scenarios that we've had a couple of people write back to us on
Yeah.
include pitch mode mouth. And the pitch mode mouth is when you talk for 90% of the time, people zone out. They're like,
Yeah.
here he goes again. And then in the end, even if you are saying something sensible, it's just wah, 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 wah. That's number one. Number two
Yeah.
is, and you kind of talked to this one, yeah, but, and that's like that whole defensive instead of exploring, and that
Yeah.
loses a whole bunch of trust. Then
Yeah.
there's the data dump person, the guy who just goes, nah, well, 65% of the time, blah, blah, blah. And then it's just like, this does not mean anything. There's no feeling, no emotion. It is just you rambling numbers on a page. And then there's the multitasking listener who is always on the phone. We know that person, that little Fred in the corner there. Do you
Yeah.
have anything to contribute, Fred? No, he's on his phone. And just maybe if you do you have any comments across any one of those four in terms of
Yeah.
what you've seen the most, what you struggle
Yeah.
with, what? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I 100%. I think I'll speak about what I do the most of. I do a lot of the go to market, right? So I do a lot of proposals, a lot of presentations, and that pitch mode is real, right? Like, you're going to need to sometimes go through 90 minutes of explaining to people the value of what you're doing and trying to convince them and get them involved. And I think the reality is, when you're pitching, sometimes there is no world where there's not in this situation where someone is going to zone out. People are going to zone out. And how do you build a proposal or a pitch with that in mind, right? So a
Yeah.
couple things that I like to do is make sure like within the first 10 minutes of the presentation, the person knows exactly what they need to know about this entire project. Like, if an executive hops in, they can be there. Sometimes I've had it happen. Executive pops in, they're just there for the first 5 minutes, and guess what? They have to go off to another presentation, right? So within that first, 10 minutes, that hook, you need to be able to articulate the entire presentation. And people have an executive summary. People like to start with the next steps in mind, right? So there's a lot of ways to do that. And that's kind of bulletproof, right? And when I say bulletproof, I mean it makes the proposal a little bit more assured that whoever reads it, if it crosses someone's desk, they'll know what they need to know about the project. So that's really difficult. And when you're in the project and when you're doing the proposal, you might want to make sure that people don't zone out each slide, right? Like you might be going through very technical specifications. And what I like to do is always have like a so what, right? Like a so what, like why is this important on each slide? And it might be business value specific, right? So from talking something heavy and very technical, what is the actual outcome for the business, for that specific part of the solution, right? So I think trying to tie it back to what the people in the room care about, it's tricky, but I think that keeps folks aligned and telling a
So,
damn good story too. Yeah,
so you know what? That last one that you talked about, I
yeah,
always say, if you had to explain this slide in 2 words, what would it be?
yeah,
And that for me is, as much as you also go, so what is, there's a simplicity around your message and around each slide that then, if it's a complicated answer, then
yeah,
you're going to confuse some people. But if the
yeah,
slide is simple enough to be able to go, in this slide, I need you to know one, two, three things, that's it. And
yeah,
you can convey those three things in 2 sentences, then you're good. And so that
100%.
whole ABCD, so what? It connects the dots, and it also, for me, the simplicity keeps it interesting, keeps it
Yeah,
more
there's a
engaging.
there's a whole industry around it, right? That's why we have management consultants. They're like the
Yeah,
kings of
exactly.
it.
And then, but then you did say also, you did talk about keep the story interesting, like
Yeah,
one hell of a story. So how then do you? I mean, obviously you got your summary in the first 10 minutes, and
yeah,
each slide you got your key points. But how do you then string that whole story so that interesting? It connects with the people.
yeah.
It How do you make sure that is something that you're striking?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like, this is something that I'm still refining this. I've been working on it for a long time, and I think it's a balance of three things, right? It's a balance of understanding who the audience is and making sure that you're giving relevant information for that audience. If I'm presenting to executive versus the technical committee, that's a different audience. They care about different things. And the beautiful thing about what we kind of started with was when you're listening early on, you get a feel of who these people are, their personalities, what they care about, and you have to tailor the presentation in that way. So a lot of the times what I like to do is give very specific examples, right? So the second thing is like giving very specific examples that we've spoken about and tying that back to what we're discussing or what the solution may look like. And by doing that, you kind of allow yourself to kind of pepper in and bring folks in to the conversation, bring folks back into the presentation. So, that third listener, I think it's the fourth listener that you described who's on his phone, that might happen, but you can kind of loop the person back in to the presentation and get them to kind of be a part of it. And the last thing is, I think, making sure that you do tie it back to the outcomes that the company is going to, and this is just more specific to a proposal, like the outcomes that the company is going to achieve. It sounds very simple, but I think it's one of the most powerful things I've seen. I've closed a lot of projects in my day, and I've seen the difference between not having that and having that. And it's something as simple as, what's the material impact to the company? Folks listen to that. People like to know, after all is said and done, what's the ROI? What's the actual business case? Like, why are we here talking? And that business case could be something different for a different context. It could just be what's important to that person and just summarizing it and making sure that you weave that in. And at the end, like having a very clear perspective. I think that's the kind of balance that I try to strike, right? So making sure it's very
And
clear to the folks. Yeah.
and so with you also building a team of 10, right?
Yeah.
Like with your team. From a leadership standpoint, I mean, we've talked about going out there and doing the sales thing, but from a team development, team building, that portion of what we've talked about, how much of those things are translatable into the very nucleus of your team? Because it's one thing to pitch, it's one thing to listen to pain points, but to drive results at the same time as being compassionate, having an EQ, being understanding. And I mean, even some of the work that you've done out of Botswana as an example, right? The cultural differences. How do you sort of then talk to that in relation or comparison to the sales pitching?
Yeah, it's a fantastic, fantastic question. And I think when I think about teams and the teams that I've led and the teams that I'm a part of, I think the transferable pieces are really around the expectations that you're setting, right? So I kind of shared, the story that you tell, the outcomes that you're trying to deliver. When I'm working with our team, I think it's important to have clear expectations and like listen and like, share what these expectations are that you have. I kind of call it tight, loose, tight, tight on expectations, loose on execution, very tight on follow up, right? So you try to set those expectations so that everyone knows kind of what they're walking into. And in the execution, I think there's a lot of dialogue that happens there. Everyone has a different way of approaching something, and everyone has a different way of coming to a conclusion or coming to a solution or coming to an outcome. And it is tricky because if anyone knows me really well, they'll tell you that I seem to be I'm a very like positive, very calm person. And there's scenarios where I definitely am that way. And there's scenarios where, you need to be a bit more, directive, or you need to, really focus on the outcome or the result. And in those scenarios, I think the thing that I've learned the most is during the execution of something, like allowing for that conversation to happen, right? Allowing for folks to kind of use their creativity to figure out what needs to be done, and also allowing them to push back on the expectations that have been set, right? And I think culturally, working in North America, working in Sub-Saharan Africa, there are some differences. I think Sub-Saharan Africa has a lot of great things about it, and there's a lot of productivity that's being realized, but there's also a difference in the pace in which things need to get done, right? So having to context switch and make sure that you're also aligning with expectations for the your teams, and not kind of over indexing on this is what I need this person to accomplish, but it's not happening in the time that I need it to be done. Has been a little bit of a learning for me, but I think the tricky part that I've found is a lot of the times people have a way to solve something. You just need to give them time to work through that, and being supportive of that, and being a part of that journey always kind of returns some type of outcome that you might not have expected. Like, I didn't know you were going to solve it that way, or I didn't think that that was a path that could have been taken, and it's like that's even better than what I had thought. So
Yeah.
that patience and kind of giving folks that room has been really beneficial for our teams that I've been a part of. Yeah.
So the beauty of that story is that I had somebody in my team. This guy, brilliant mind, but but you needed to listen to him. And I never really understood that at a point. And so he would start to talk about something, and I'd be like, look, I've understood what you said, but this is not gonna. And he'd be like, in one moment, one time, he just goes, "Let me just share. Let me just tell you so that I can get it off my chest." And the second he said that, I just was like, okay, so he doesn't want me to contribute. He just wants to be able to express and to feel heard. And so I listened to him. He finished. After he finished, he was just like, so what is it that you wanted? And then that is how then we sort of built a relationship that then allowed for him to be heard. He also then would then hear me, and then he, in his rants or in his moments, some wonderful nuggets would come out of that, but he'd also feel a sense of belonging within the team because he knows that he can talk, he'll be listened to, and then we will then move from that point and not him not have a voice at all. And that delivered the best version of him that I'd ever seen at a point I didn't think that I could unlock him. And and what you're saying is that there's some context sometimes where people might have a different upbringing. That upbringing might then translate itself in the way that they communicate, how they deliver certain things, and how they process certain things. And if you've got the patience to be able to find that little gap, that's when you really stand the chance to unlock.
I love that.
Uh,
That really resonates, man. I can I hear you. I feel like I'm seeing like multiple scenarios like that, and it's like how many times I'm curious for you, DK, like when you've had a really good conversation with someone, you can feel it. You know it's a good conversation. It's like how
yeah,
you felt, not even what the person said, it's how you felt afterwards. And it's that feeling, and you know when it happens, like when you feel listened to and heard. And I think that that example really resonates. Yeah.
yeah, and I guess that whole thing of connection, because that's what we're talking about now, is you're trying to build deep connections so that you feel, or people in your team feel, or the client feels as though they are not necessarily a number. They're not necessarily a target. They're not necessarily a innate object. Like they are somebody, something of value. They are useful in some way or the other, and they've got contributions to give. And because you connect with somebody, then that's your opportunity to get the most out of them. And and I guess that's the whole thing. And with what you've said, it's very, very interesting that I love how the sales pitching and the connection between people and teams is beautiful. But
Yeah.
before I give you the quote of the day, I'm going to give you an opportunity to maybe say a couple of things if you've got something else to add.
No, I think this is a fantastic conversation, and I think the one thing that I will just kind of like preface is I'm not a perfect listener. You know, I'm still working on this skill, and I think I've seen it in different contexts, and just for whoever does listen to it, I think there is always going to be learning involved. There's never going to be a scenario where I think someone would get to like I've gotten to the top of the pyramid in terms of all of my listening skills. I think it's just like a consistent learning. And yeah, just from the shameless folks, like it's just a great journey to be on. And starting with just that first, tell me more, or that first conversation, and that feeling of being listened to is a powerful one that I'm sure everyone resonates with. So yeah, that's everything that I had. It's a pleasure. So thanks for that, DK.
No stress. So I've got the quote for the episode. And the quote from the episode comes from none other than J. Cole himself. I mean, you set the tone, so I had to just follow up with that. Um, and so it might seem a bit strange, but this is the quote: anything's possible. You got to dream like you never seen obstacles. And you might ask me, why is that the quote for me? Because I think sometimes we get caught up in a whole bunch of technical jargon. We get caught up in a lot of different um, problems, a lot of different tasks, and whether that is within your personal life, whether that is within the team that you're working with, and whether that is with clients, and anything is possible. But in order to make it possible, sometimes the key is in the art of listening, and it's in the art of connection. And needless to say, this is what we've just been talking about. Whether it is people who are willing to pay more money, and 75% of people willing to pay more money, just so that, just with somebody who is willing to listen to them, whether it is you trying not to be on a automated call with the chatbot, and whether it is trying to retain talent. I think, Ludzi, your experiences across different countries, different cultures, different industries really shines a lot of light within that space. And as you talked about the technical team and the 10-man team that you're working with in CRM, cloud engineering services that you're currently working with, Trail Consult, I think your experiences explained to me, or I understood, that that art of connection is the first and the centerpiece towards being able to unlock value, not only within yourself, but within your clients. And the part that you started with is seek to understand before being understood. And with that, you listen more, you understand the pains of an individual, of a client, of a journey. And the layers that you talked about, CEO, the team, the individual, really looks to break down the root cause of the issues. Because if you talk too soon, if you listen too fast, you might not understand the depth of an issue. You might not understand the intricacies, the nuances, the details. And even so, more so, is when you come back to do your proposal, which is the second part of your story, is that you fail to actually really withdraw or extract the nuances and the reflections that really are going to be able to make that proposal, make that conversation a lot more engaging. And when you use, I love the tool that you talked about, is what we heard you say, right? And whether that is to a client or to a person, always being able to reflect back. When you said this is what I heard in a one-on-one conversation, or to a client where you map it all out and you say, this is what I've seen, and then the actionable outcomes and the business value. And that is the difference between flat, falling on the face, or success, going through the roof. As you said, you've got a few examples for that. Then the last one, there is no proposal without action. There is no listening. There is no connection. There is no trust. Trust is built off of the fact that you're going to be able to continuously provide the feedback, the results, the outcome. Because what is the point of talking if you don't be heard, if you're not heard? And what's the point of being heard if you don't see a result? That is, again, personal, team, or client. And I love when you talked about the waterfall agile methodology, different ways of doing it, and that ability to balance both the feedback as well as the results in an agile approach is fantastic. Good thing we went a long way. Bad thing we went the wrong way. That's another one of your J. Cole quotes, and it really just touches on the idea that anything is possible, but if you do it with the wrong without the wrong engagement, without the right engagement, you will find yourself with a whole bunch of obstacles. Then I'm going to just touch on quickly building a pitch. First 10 minutes, hook, line, and sinker. Keep it brief, keep it short, get the value within the first 10 minutes, then elaborate from there onwards. Understand your audience. Different people, different personalities, always trying to loop down the specifics that you've had as you are understanding a group of people. Specific examples. In fact, if anything, the more specific understands you shows that you understand the problem, and shows that you're very attentive, and therefore you also allow for little Fred over there in the corner to be drawn into the conversation. The last one is outcomes to value, and that is, what is my ROI? Am I able to give you? What am I going to do to get you there? And those are the things that rarely allows for somebody to be engaged within the conversation. So for me, it's very clear. The expectations need to be clear. The results need to be clear. The trust needs to be built. You need to understand where an individual plays a part. And so for me, if you've got that clarity, if you've got that connection, you've got that trust, that is the first step towards ensuring that these obstacles are not there and anything becomes possible. Now, the question that I have and the challenge that I pose to everybody here: when was the last time that you really failed to listen? And what did you learn from that moment? Have you repeated that? And how do you ensure that you don't repeat that again? Drop your likes, your comments, your views, your expressions in the comment below. I'd love to hear what you've got to add. Lutzi, it's been absolutely a pleasure for me to have you here. I've had so much fun having this discussion, and it's been very informative, and I really hope the same thing. And I know, I don't hope, I know that this has been the same for all the listeners today. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, DK. It was a fantastic time. Thank you so much. And thank you for the great conversation. Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Trisommation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.